kicking right into it. Okay, so right now what we're considering is why the blockchain is a symptom of enterprising investment, or the enterprising investor in the sense of Benjamin Graham, and how what we're experiencing in 2022 is the majority of people involved in the blockchain or crypto assets are enterprising investors, meaning they have a greater temperament for speculation, and just as any human would tamper the anxieties of speculation, they compensate by being involved. But what happens when you have other types of investors or defensive investors who no longer, or it's not that they never had the appetite to be involved in their investments. So what do? They put that involvement into the hands of a third party. There's always been a third party. The third party that's the value of a third party, is that they deal with your business for you and make it profitable. And prior to the Federal Reserve, that third party were individuals, JP Morgan in particular. So what we're looking at now is kind of the consequences that led up to what we have today of that third party being the federal government and all the adverse effects from it, right?
Right. I mean, but also all third parties are not created equal. I mean, you have mortgage lending, for example. That's a third party that is heavily relied on almost equally as the Federal Reserve.
Well, but those lenders are still lending money in dollar denominated funds. So their bottom line has to be on the same ledger as what is in the Federal Reserve. Right. That's what I'm saying.
That Federal Reserve is like the umbrella.
That is the third party that belongs to the federal government. And that's what I'm saying. The whole thing is that people don't have a problem using a third party to facilitate the growth in their wealth. But what the difference of the old days to what we have now, the maturity of the experiment of putting that third party into the hands of the government. And what I'm suggesting is that lead up was one event that coincided with many in this fanfare of a societal desire for the government to take more control and protect the people. But you say the people, who are the people? Who's the government really protecting? Well, what we know now in 2022 is that the government's just going to protect itself. No bureaucracy, whether it's the government or not, no bureaucratic environment is going to destroy itself. It's not going to act counterintuitive to its own survival. And so that's what we have in 2022, which is it's a decision between allowing people, not the people, but allowing people to retain sovereignty over ownership. And what is the federal government doing? Saying, no. Like, if it's a decision between you keeping your sovereignty and wealth and the federal government going completely bankrupt because we can't pay ourselves anymore, well, that's where we're having a copious amount of money printed overnight, and the value, the purchasing power of a person's wealth being dissolved in the name of keeping the government in working order. And that lead up, it was a long lead up. Whether it was during this panic of 1893, JP Morgan bailed out the United States, and then the Depression of 1921, and then it took another 25 years, but then the formation of the Federal Reserve, that was basically this evolving notion that in order to have the most transparent steward of our wealth and our democracy, people are going to always bring up democracy, that responsibility should be placed in the most accountable institution. And so what did people come up with? People didn't come up with it. Bankers came up with it. That the monopolies of banking without Jekyll Island, is that nobody knew it was happening, and that they arrived to the island under pseudonames because they knew how controversial the topic would be if people found out that they're taking away the discretion of an individual to valuate wealth or to valuate currency. And that's what we have today, is that this singularity in technology where it's subverted the government influence of what money is worth by putting it back into people's hands in the blockchain to distinguish for themselves what the blockchain is worth. But what do you see so many people doing? What do we see in crypto? How do people evaluate cryptocurrency right now? What do they base it on?
I think a lot of it has to do with psychology of the utility that these blockchains provide. I mean, you have these decentralized autonomous organizations now. You could literally take every single facet that the government has, every process that the government has automated on Web 2, and you can create a smart contract that does exactly that. And then you can have checks and balances that are built into that, though each one of those smart contracts, where human intervention is a moot point, because the smart contract basically it's law. Code becomes law, and you can't work around it. You can't lobby against it, because if you put something in a smart contract and you say, hey, if X happens, do Y, then it's a programmable governance. And I think that's probably the most powerful part of it, is that if you look over history, every government is governed by a set of people with usually a figurehead. If you can program the functions of said people and make it immutable on a blockchain, then wouldn't that be, I don't know, I just feel like that's kind of where we're headed.
Well, there's still a third party here, and it's the smart contract. And yes, we're enshrining that third party, and I used the word singularity probably wrong earlier, but I think a more accurate sense of a singularity is that we went from the third party that we trust to manage our money in the form of a private citizen who we commission and offer a commission to manage that money, to putting that, when I say manage money, like determine its value based on a finite amount, the way it was originally intended to be, which is based on the availability of gold and what that note that you actually passed to buy stuff represented in its weight in gold, to a fiat currency that the third party was then handed off to a federal government who determines the value of money based on the money supply. And like I was saying before, is that the government's made it very clear that they will not sacrifice themselves for the sovereignty of people to determine for themselves the value of money, because they've manufactured so much of it into the money supply, which is causing inflation. But now the singularity is we've moved from private citizens to the government to now putting this third party into the hands of a computer or artificial intelligence. And AI is, what I'm concerned, is the next categorical imperative that you can't argue against. Right now, it's science. Everything's in the name of science, the tyranny of science. And basically, if you can articulate the science of something, then you don't have an argument, and you have to basically comply. Where taking something as complex as AI and then claiming legitimacy in the hands of it just figuring it out is probably a closer, like a more absolute definition of singularity, that we're now basing the valuation of stored value over time in the hands of a computer.
I mean, then the argument becomes, can the computer do a better job than humans? I mean, because humans have something that a computer might never have. I mean, we have these narrow artificial intelligences, but we don't have a general artificial intelligence. A narrow artificial intelligence is defined as an artificial intelligence that can differentiate a cat in a picture from any other object. Or like farmers, they use a narrow AI to determine weeds in the field. Like they have this big machine that goes over their whole crop, and there's a camera that moves back and forth, and it can see, it can actually see what the weeds are, and it knows a weed from a pickle or a cucumber, and it can kill that weed, and it does that kind of stuff really well. But I don't think we're anywhere close to having an artificial general intelligence that can use discretion the same way that a human would use discretion, all without being subjective. I think that what you were saying is true, where the government's going to fight tooth and nail against cryptocurrency because it is going to fight for its survival. It's not going to do anything that will, I mean, it's not going to commit, what do they call it? Bukkake? Nope, that's not it. Harikari. It's not going to commit harikari and kill itself, right? I said bukkake. We'll cut that out. but it's not gonna kill itself. So the only way that decentralized is gonna work is, this notion of having a centralized digital currency is also flawed, because it's basically the same thing that we have now, just with more control. I mean, that's not gonna fly for the masses who understand the power of blockchain. I feel like it's just kind of like a dying breath of an old system.
Well, no, but that's part of it, because when was the last time you listened to a congressional oversight meeting talking about the internet? They don't know what they're talking about. So they would be they would be shooting themselves in the foot by creating a centralized digital currency, because anybody who understands the fundamentals of the blockchain would witness that they just wrote themselves a blank check, and that the dollar is inevitably going to be diluted into oblivion. And then I think it would be great for us, because, if anybody knew their ass from the hole in the ground, would be shifting everything immediately into crypto, creating a froth and speculative bubble that would come to settle. But after the fact, there would be this, the federal government would go bankrupt overnight, and then you would have this, very loose trading system that's all based on a ledger that I think would be in the highest interest of a foreign adversary to destroy immediately, or to, really lock down. And as long as you just take out the physical infrastructure of the blockchain, then people will be in poverty. It's a single point of failure in a geopolitical stance, because you're putting the nation's security of stores of value in the hands of undefended or indefensible private homes, that all you really need is the Gestapo to go door to door and really take care of that. I mean, that was the point I was making, is that these lawmakers do not know. Their advisors are, in my opinion, clueless, but their due diligence in learning the fundamentals is gonna be pretty much clickbait. You have, and that's what I was saying before about being an enterprising investor in crypto, and why this space is so speculative right now, because there's no defensive investors. You have to be so immersed into the technical details of it, that even think tanks in Washington, D.C. right now that maybe exist, but they're probably redheaded stepchildren of the entire think tank community, they're not going to be able to generate enough of the ad hoc queries of Congress people to answer the questions for them to understand completely in order to make a decision on it. What I mean is, you have to be a pretty decent nerd in order to really understand the fundamentals of the physical infrastructure that is the blockchain, and that's protecting the blockchain right now. So if we move deeper into this decentralization initiative, that the blockchain is somehow going to create a more reasonable, sustainable grounds of trading a store of value for goods and services, then there's not enough bandwidth in a typical person. And what I mean a typical person is like you have to take a huge sample of how many people really want to deal with what this is, what this is worth, why it's worth this, and why you should choose this particular product over the next, because there's so many, alt and shit coins to choose from. What's making Ethereum more valuable than Bitcoin? What are the quirks of Bitcoin that make Ethereum more promising for the applications of crypto? And here it goes back to what you were saying, that it's far-fetched for AI to tell us what something is worth because of how speculative it is. And have you ever heard of the 17th century Tulip Mania and financial crash?
Yeah, that was like the original money, tulips.
It's just an example. I guess the background is that people thought tulips were going to become extinct, and so their value went parabolic overnight, and there was blood in the streets from people just trying to acquire these things, and then what they thought was going to happen didn't, and it crashed, right? It's the emotional element to what fungible things are. And even Native Americans trading beads, it was a huge speculative asset to the original colonialists. Colonialists first got here, they traded beads to the natives for goods and services.
I mean, among other things, right?
No. Well, no, the beads in particular. That the beads were highly coveted by Native Americans, and they were beads to Europeans. And so they would ship beads by the barrel to North America. And then what I'm saying is like that natives saw this as valuable for whatever purpose it was. And so back to the singularity concept, if you're taking that third party is distinguishing value by its supply of it into the hands of a computer, then remove the speculative nature of value for the rest of human existence. If that were to be the dystopian outcome into this new brave world, that there will no longer be anything that's just cool enough to where I keep, and then everybody else finds out how cool it is, and then I give it to that next person for a trade of something that I didn't have before, where all this circuitry of value is algorithmic in a blockchain. And that's, I think, a pretty dark place, because it removes people's ability to, that's worse than communism. That's taking the discretion from a human being completely. And then who are we except for, these pods in energy fields just maintaining the blockchain, like in the Matrix?
Before blockchain technology even got a foothold in the marketplace, they were talking about, I think his name is Nick Bostrom, wrote a book called Super Intelligence, and he goes over all the different possibilities of how an artificial general intelligence could manifest. And it's a Pandora's box. It's a black box. You don't know what you're going to get until you open that box. And there's this notion that we are going to be the pets of robots. Like, robots are going to be the overlords, and humans are just going to be kind of like a pet. But if everything goes to zero, you could develop a robot, 2 feet by 2 feet big in a cube. Everyone in the world gets this robot for free, and you put it in the middle of a forest, and you press a button, and it cuts down the trees for you, and it clears out the space, and it lays down the foundation and literally builds you a house. Then you get that house for free. The robot's doing all the work for you. Same thing with agriculture. If you replace humans and get robots to do it for you, then your net cost for developing produce and vegetables and fruits go to zero, because all it was is the cost of the robot, the cost of the software, which is copyable across the device. The owners, the creators of that robot would be astronomically rich, but then that's kind of like, for what? If everything goes to zero, you're basically you're a slave with freedom. You have all of the freedoms to want to pursue a creative, and basically at that point we're just entertaining each other.
If you say we're going to be pets to robots, I think that's being invited already, because think about, what purpose in life does your dog serve? But, what do they have provided for them? We put our concept of value into the hands of a computer, and we no longer have a sense of what is of value, because
look, what is value at the end of the day?
It's not covetance. Covetance is what we would be left with. I mean, it's worse than slavery. You're just, what would you even covet if you knew it didn't have any value either? Then you would learn to covet things that are symmetric and shiny, like beads.
Well, yeah. So let's just, if we're going down this thought experiment, that's what a singularity is where technology gets so good to the point where humankind literally becomes a different thing in a matter of like seconds.
Well, they can't tell the difference. Yeah,
you go from one stage of human beings literally to a completely different stage. And so say all of our creature comforts are met, and all of the creature comforts are met for $0 because you've created the ability to mass produce these robots that are mass producing more robots that are mass producing things that you use on a day-to-day basis, from clothing, food, shelter. I mean, that's really what every single human being in the world needs, right? Food, clothing, and shelter. And if all of those needs are met, and all of those needs are met for free, and you have robots that are doing it for you, then what is life? Well, I think that the answer is whatever you want it to be. Where do you find purpose if you're talking about people who are like the 1% of the 1%, like who are flying in jets and stuff, and they just do whatever the fuck they want because money's not an object. But then if money doesn't become an object, who are you?
Well, let's talk about that. Have you heard of the recent suicides of these privileged? I mean, I'm not saying they are born into it, but the CEO of Texas Roadhouse just killed himself, shot himself, I'm pretty sure. The former Miss America jumped off a building. Did you hear about that?
No.
The director of the Atlanta Transportation Administration, I think I have to Google what it's called, but basically Atlanta Transit, the head of Atlanta Transit jumped in front of a train. So does it correlate to you having a meaningless life because you had everything provided for you? No, but these people with the merit from their achievements, what most people would recognize as having, everything, that's hyperbolic, but what do you have left to live for when there's no wind at your back? There's nowhere to go.
I don't know, man, because it seems like it's the opposite, that there's an endless amount of places to go. Because if everyone in the world has food, clothing, and shelter, and it's provided by robots that cost you nothing, then the next enterprise is space, right? That's when we can leave the planet and adventure out into space.
Well, that would be, you would need the incentive to do it, and that's what we're talking about. What are we incentivized by, and what leads us to one corner of the world or another? And that's where profit has offered that opportunity in mindset, and it's driven.
I think for one, engineers and scientists and doctors become the most coveted fields that you can possibly attain, because the people that are engineers and scientists and doctors wanted to be engineers and scientists and doctors.
What they do need is the resources in order for their imaginations to continue to develop. And where do those resources come from but the profit, which is the byproduct of their enthusiasm? Think about the guys from the Silicon Valley skit, the time to jerk skit.
The middle out compression. Yeah.
What made it interesting is that because these guys have a recreation for problem solving, and that they'll take the most trivial thing and turn it into their gymnastics. And an engineer is a good example of why a free enterprise creates more innovation. It's because you have these people that are innovative for innovation's sake, but still need fuel for that fire. And that fuel for that fire is the life support of profit, of creating.
I agree. There is something to be said about chasing something that you can have that gives you value, right? So that's dollars, and by and large, that's the answer for that is dollars, right? That's, you get dollars so you can pay for stuff, so you can have luxuries and
well, dollars represent they represent a store of value that you can exchange it for more resources. And it's those resources that are given the dreamers and the innovators and the engineers the opportunity to do their thing. That's all the dollar represents.
So if we do get to a zero cost society, and look, I'm not saying that I think this is where we're going as a global society, but if you have a net zero society, then what is the thing that you chase? What is the value profit? Like, what is your profit gain? What would that look like?
I mean, it's proximity to God. That's what heaven is. I mean, we toil, and it's in this venue of life to give the glory to God, and that's what heaven is a proximity to God. So there's no longer a carrot. That's the most exhausting part about being a Christian, is that you're plagued by this carrot of continuing into an older age, that you just get exhausted, and that where does this, when do you get to remove self-serving from the equation? And it's a product of a fallen earth. It's a product of a fallen existence. And that's what we're plagued with, is that you're constantly searching for more and more and more and more. And then we create technology that facilitates this scaling of providing our needs, our essential needs, to the point where we're at a homeostasis of existence. We've progressed from a hunter-gatherer. We're at a point where we've cultivated our whole civilization to provide for us luxuries and or a more predictable existence. And I think that's something we're seeing on a regular, going back to the point of suicide, is that people are losing the meaning of life because they immerse themselves into the ambiguity of what is it all for, without having certain institutions, whether it's family, friends, or church, or a good job, to intervene on that kind of thing. But they get lost in the sauce about this world we live in, that it's hard to differentiate. Why are we doing what we're doing right now if we can just literally float around and have a relatively comfortable life? Whether that's in precondition to work, you can get into a corporate welfare position, where you just go play the game, climb the ladder, and for the most part be provided for, or literally go into a social safety net where you can bounce from program to program, but still have food in your mouth in the United States. And we're seeing the ripple effects of that. And people call it mental illness and depression, but I see it as just an obsession with the supplements of our way of life. It's like, gosh, what meaning do I have anymore if I'm just here being fed? People want to eat. That's human nature. When you arrest that initiative from people, it's not pretty. I wouldn't be an advocate for it. I'm just going to continue to want more. And I'm just the type to want more for the sake of just creating more. I want more resources so I can create more things. I want $1 million so I can start 2 more businesses. I want a lot of land so I can turn that land into a farm or a ranch, and create profit out of it, and then sell it, wash, rinse, repeat. That's an initiative of me personally knowing that my thirst for wonder will not be quenched until I gain proximity to God. That's the meaning of life to me. I'm just witnessing, I'm just observing how I see a lot of people get lost in that sauce of what am I working for? And it's because they bypassed, you're not going to find what you're looking for here. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, no, I feel that it's definitely it's definitely a tough thing, because I feel like we as in the big W, we look at other people and we see what other people are doing, and we develop an idea of happiness, and then we have this paradigm where it's like we do something so we can have something, and then we'll be that thing. It's the do. I'm gonna work so that I can have money, so that I can be happy. I think that people got it confused. I think it's the other way around. I think that you have to be happy so that you can have money, and then you can do more things to make you happy.
It puts you in touch with authenticity, and that's what people want. If you can't be authentic, then what are you doing? You're faking it. And so, yeah, and the faking it part is where it's like, I need to do something. It's a means to an end, where authenticity is an end in and of itself. And so if you create, the thing about the means to an end concept is there's a huge market for that. There's a huge sales point to be had to offer people a means to an end.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly what I'm saying, is that it's so rampant. And like, my initial thought is like, well, how do we fix that? The engineer side of me is like, well, that seems like an obvious problem. How can that be fixed? But then
let me say it because it's in my mind. Maybe I'll point the direction there, but it's an acquaintanceship with death, and knowing that death will come, and sometimes in really miserable ways, or it might come for somebody that you love before it comes for you, and you'll witness how miserable it was for them. And then the shininess of a means to an end is lackluster. So that way you're more acquainted with the end in of itself, which is just being in a genuine form of interest in the things that you do and the people that you interact with.
Yeah, I think that definitely. I mean, you have people who have near-death experiences, and then they go travel the world for a year and completely change their lives. Or you do what I did and take an eighth of mushrooms with one of your good friends and talk about life and how, and then it comes to you naturally.
Yeah. Well, yes, there's a million ways to skin that cat. Meanwhile, I think the uncertainty of that perspective is that there's no set way to indoctrinate somebody into that mindset. And
I don't think that it's healthy to indoctrinate.
No. Yeah, that's
like even if it's something that you believe is objectively good. Like, I believe that is objectively good to be genuine, to lead with happiness as a choice, so that way you can have the things that you want to have rather than do the things that you think is going to make you happy. Happiness
isn't necessarily the destination, and it's not, in my opinion, but you can force yourself to get off on different places. You can force yourself to get off at happiness. Someone can force you to get off at happiness, and that's how much of that is your decision. And cognitive dissonance is, I guess, a loaded phrase to describe it, but I think a lot of people find a spot in life to get off at that point, and then realize that they got off the train too soon, because there's a lot more life to be lived. Instead of this wanting to be happy at all times, there's no texture to that. But it also makes me think of being manipulated into getting off at a certain stop through trauma. And that can be in the form of sexual assault at a young age, domestic assault at a young age, and not the type that is happenstance, like the type that is intentional, and being a victim, and having a design for it. An extreme example is Joseph Kony in Uganda, and his technique of indoctrinating child soldiers into the ranks would be going village to village, kidnapping kids, and then forcing those kids from the same village to have a fight to the death, and prefaced with the ground rules to, if both of you survive, then you'll both be killed. And it was essentially Kony leveraging this train analogy, I guess, and knowing that you can force people to get off at certain stops, and you can direct their life's meaning. And his model was to basically cause these kids to feel so ashamed of themselves that they would never abandon his army and go back home, because the kids would have in their mind this unforgivable act of killing their friend with their bare hands. And it's a dark example of how people can be manipulated. By no means is it there because of their lack of desire to not be a subject to that kind of thing, but who's forcing you to get off of the train? Are you deciding what your destination is? And that goes back into this blockchain where what is value? How are we going to guide our lives? And by making a form of valuing stores of labor, stores of wealth into a artificial intelligence, are we basically putting our lives into the hands of a computer to tell us when and where to get on and off of this train of our interests and our desires and our wants and our destinies? And how many people are going to be advocates for that? Because I think if the technology is available, they will desire it because they always want that third party to be responsible. And now the move towards artificial intelligence is the new religion. Right now, state is the religion. Right now in 2022, in the United States and Australia and Canada, all these great Western countries, people worship the government. People worship that third party.
Yeah, definitely think that there's a self-sovereignty. If we have a artificial intelligence that is able to do that level of manipulation, I guess we can call it, it really, it's up to us to circumvent and navigate our way around our own moral ethic and code. It's really up to us. I mean, blockchain is introducing a new level of self-responsibility, because if you send your crypto to a wrong wallet, even if you have one digit out of place, it's gone forever. There's no third-party custodian that is you can call and say, hey, where's my money? You have to know what you're doing. You have to be super responsible for every single one of your actions. And I just hope that, hope is not a COA, right? But I hope that as a society, we can be more responsible for our own feelings and our own choices when it comes down to it, barring any terrible situation like what you described with Coney. That shit's crazy.
I don't think it's skepticism when I say that it's inevitable that people are going to, they're going to want some kind of regulation. They're going to want some kind of accountability. It goes back to the means to an end, and then the end in and of itself. And that end in and of itself is authenticity. And then the means to an end is that desire for getting off somewhere that is ultimately being sold to you. And I think that there's going to be a huge market for people to forego the decentralizing elements of the blockchain and then create this new era of the third party, which is AI. No different than science, that basically a computer is infallible, more secure than what we've ever experienced. And that's when people are just going to dive into it. And then it's going to create this very strange consequence. People being told how much they need to trade either their time or their assets for the X amount in value of what this robot is saying. I hope that I retain as much of a end in of itself mentality as possible, benefit from that huge transfer of wealth, which will be that initial froth of the value of crypto assets, and acquire what will be necessary to maintain myself and my family and a few generations of my family into this weird future. But time will tell. I think that if we dismiss the general sense of decentralized, if we just say all things that are decentralized are good, and all things that are decentralized are going to bring more independence and more opportunity and less manipulation, then you're missing the bigger point of that this is a fallen world, and that people will cling on to their idol. People have clinged on to that idol of a third party in the form of the private party, the JP Morgans. Throughout the 20th century, it was the federal government, into what we are now dawning on, what I'm suggesting could be AI as that idol. Science is creating the germinating seeds of what this new brass ball will be for people, and it's going to be a robot saying, this is what you worship now, and this is how much it's worth.
I think you're right. I think that I think that is entirely where we are headed. And I want to invite anyone who is, happen to listen this far into this recording, if it ever makes it out onto a medium, to be a part of a tribe, be a part of a community that focuses on fighting against a dystopian AI future, but in welcoming a more integrative experience that is based on your current morals and ethics of what you want out of life. And yeah, I mean, that's what I want out of this venture that we started, Brad. I think that it's a moral and ethical imperative for us to find the people who align with that and grow with them.
Yeah, if we can disseminate the idea, then we can have the conversation. And as the conversation grows, we can thwart whatever attempts of the masses to imprison themselves with the next great idol.
I think you're right. There's going to be third parties. There's the marketplace is very, it's huge. It's global now. I mean, and you're going to have people that are going to get taken advantage of with these different narratives, and it's going to be harder and harder and harder and harder to filter and digest the wheat from the chaff.
Have you ever seen Soylent Green?
I think that sounds so familiar.
It's worth Googling, but yeah, I mean, I don't know if we're, heading towards, people talk about the food shortage, but what I mean is that the conformity of the masses that are oblivious to how their menial lives are sustained by an overarching influence. After this great reset, you own nothing and be happy. But what does that mean is that the global elite, the central planners, are posturing themselves to tell you what is valuable, and it will permeate beyond your bank account or wallet, and it will go into the mode that you perceive relationships, events in life to corrupt the divine intervention of life and a relationship with God or a single creator. I mean, it's the Matrix. I mean, that's what they're getting at, I'm sure. But unless we have a conversation about it, unless we contribute to a conversation about it, then it goes unnoticed. There's no formation of ideas. We can't go as far as we want to by ourselves. So if you have listened to this, we're inviting you to contribute to our conversation. And it might take some time. It might require you to listen to a few more of these. In this new era, technology and capabilities, we're given a vehicle to create not new ideas, but a conversation of what we're experiencing around us. We're not really looking to create new ideas. We're trying to just comprehend. We're trying to break out of this manufactured experience that's orchestrated by that third party, by those idols. And through conversations, we can do that.